Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the profound cognitive and philosophical differences between Eastern and Western thought, straight from our source texts. We hear the phrase East-West divide all the time, right? Usually we think about it in terms of, geopolitics, borders, or trade, but the texts we're looking at today suggest something much, much deeper. They propose that this divide is fundamentally cognitive. It's literally rooted in how our brains process the raw data of reality. And more importantly, understanding this exact difference is the absolute key to unlocking something called autogenous modernity, which is basically a self-generating, distinctly Eastern blueprint for the modern world.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We've got 1. How we see the world, 2. Roots of East and West, 3. Designing autogenous modernity, 4. East and West in Day Soon, and 5. A new philosophical synthesis. Let's jump right in.
Starting off with Section 1, How We See the World, a Cognitive Divide.
I want you to try a really quick thought experiment drawn directly from Richard Nisbet's research in cognitive psychology. Imagine I show you a picture of a bird flying over a lush green landscape, maybe with a few trees and a bright blue sky. Got it? Okay, now take that image away in your mind's eye. What specific details stick in your memory? Like, what did you actually focus on?
Well, Nisbet found a clear, measurable split in our cognitive patterns when subjects did this exact exercise. Easterners tend to recall the background. Their memory anchors on to the context, the lushness of the landscape, the environment, the whole shebang. On the flip side, Westerners typically remember the specific bird itself, or, the exact number of birds if there were multiple. Their cognition zeroes in on the individual objects and quantities, basically blurring out the background. It's wildly profound when you think about it. Two people can look at the exact same picture and walk away experiencing two completely different realities.
And this brilliantly illustrates the divide between two fundamental ways of thinking. We've got Eastern holistic thinking, which focuses on context, favors collective control, and embraces a highly complex worldview. And then we have Western analytic thinking, an approach that simplifies the world by analyzing individual objects, constantly counting quantities, and favoring personal control. Think of it like trying to fix a broken machine. An analytical thinker might isolate a single faulty gear and put it under a microscope. A holistic thinker? They might look at the entire ecosystem of the machine to see how all the parts interact. It's not that one is better than the other, they're just entirely different operating systems for the human mind.
Which brings us to Section 2, Roots of East and West, Agriculture and Commerce.
So where did these vastly different cognitive operating systems actually come from? The source text points to deeply ingrained environmental and historical origins that literally shaped human brains over generations. In the West, early societies were largely defined by commerce. If you're trading across borders, you absolutely need strict definitions, exact numbers, clear communication. This environment forced a strict logical distinction between an object's essence and its physical substance. Meanwhile, in the East, societies were heavily centered around agriculture. Surviving meant having an intuitive awareness of the seasons and a direct collective relationship with nature. I mean, you can't farm rice alone, right? The environment dictated the mind. Collectivity grew from the farm, individuality grew from the market.
Now, to understand the absolute limits of these worldviews, we have to talk about a concept called immanence. Basically, immanence refers to the unspoken rules and hidden philosophical conventions unique to a specific culture. Think of it as the water a fish swims in. The fish has no idea what wet is because it's just surrounded by it. These foundational beliefs are practically invisible to the culture itself and really only become obvious when an outsider points them out.
So what is the immanence, or the invisible water of these two hemispheres? For the West, this unspoken rule is firmly rooted in Aristotle's substance theory. To demystify that a bit, it just means believing the universe is made of independent, standalone building blocks, kind of like Lego bricks. But the East relies on a completely different foundation, symmetrical, holistic thinking. The text highlights how concepts like emptiness or the symmetry of yin and yang form a worldview that focuses on the space between the bricks. The relationships actually matter more than the objects themselves.
Let's move on to Section 3, Designing Autogenous Modernity.
This is the crucial point of this entire analysis. We have to understand the stakes here. For decades, developing nations just assumed that to become modern, they had to become Western. The two concepts were basically tied at the hip. But autogenous modernity is a radical rebellion against that idea. It proposes that a modern society can be self-generating. It argues that Eastern societies can build a highly advanced modern framework based entirely on their own correlational, holistic thinking, without just copy-pasting Western analytic structures.
Thinkers like Wang Hui are actively exploring this alternative blueprint.
He looks at modernization strictly through the lens of Chinese thinking. So, instead of basing a society on isolated individual rights, he uses traditional concepts like Confucius's idea of benevolence and yin and yang correlational thinking. By designing a system based on mutual relationships, he's aiming to overcome the strict limitations of Western substantism. He's essentially saying, hey, the East has its own incredibly powerful software to run a modern society. We don't need to borrow the West's code.
Now we hit Section 4, East and West in Daesun thought.
This is where things get really fascinating, as we transition from social philosophy into theology. Daesun thought is a syncretic Korean philosophy and new religious movement. What's incredible is how it takes the exact cognitive differences we just talked about and elevates them into a literal cosmological map. It uses the legendary Kunlun Mountain as the dividing line of reality. The East is mapped to Yin, utilizing top-down principles and holistic systems. The West is mapped to Yang, representing bottom-up principles and analytical thought. The philosophy actually becomes the layout of the universe itself.
And the text emphasizes that this divide isn't just physical or cultural. It's deeply, deeply mystical. Take a look at this quote. It notes that before historical figures like the Jesuit missionary Matteo Ricci bridged the continents, the East and West were so completely isolated that even the gods and spirits of these two realms were walled off from one another. Just let the theological weight of that sink in for a second. The deities themselves had a border.
What this means in practice is that the East-West cognitive distinction is the fundamental architecture of reality. The difference between Donghak, which is Eastern learning, and Sohak, Western learning, isn't just a clash of human cultures. It reflects the literal physics of the divine realm. It stretches from the simple way a human looks at a bird all the way up to the structural organization of spirits in the heavens. It's all connected.
And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, a new philosophical synthesis. Ultimately, the text suggests that the path forward isn't about one side winning out over the other. It's all about integration. By interpreting the East-West divide through the complementary lens of yin and yang, we can provide a truly self-generating framework for a global modernity. It means taking the Western ability to focus deeply on the individual bird and combining it with the Eastern ability to see the forest and the background context. Think about a massive modern challenge like climate change. Solving it requires hyper-specific analytical data from Western science, completely combined with the holistic, relationship-based systemic changes inherent to Eastern thinking. We need both. Which leaves us with this profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If our cognitive roots truly dictate the literal reality we experience every single day, how could synthesizing these deeply ingrained Eastern and Western perspectives completely transform the future of our world? It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the absolute best way to move forward is to fundamentally change the way we see the background. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.